All right, priest. Priest. Priest is kind of in an awkward spot. I've never really liked it as a class because it doesn't seem very skill focused. It seems very variance focused, where sometimes you're able to get on the board and then your hero power becomes relevant. A lot of times you aren't able to get on the board and you just lose because there was nothing really you could do. You didn't have a lot of options. So, not really that fond of playing priest in arena, but it does sometimes compete as a pretty good class. And it in a meta that is slowed down, you have to imagine that priest gets better, right? Because the more slow the meta is, the more it has time to both develop its board and then start getting value out of its hero power over time. And it also does have access to some very good spells like mind control, which are just king of the slow formats. So there is a shift that's positive in the meta for priest. At the same time, it is losing some very important stuff. One of the ways I think priest kind of got there was the dragon synergies. Draconid Operative and Dragonfire Potion being two of the really big cards in that. And both of those are still available, but they aren't as strong as they were before now that all the dragons are basically gone. And you're just kind of left with these. It's difficult to piece stuff together. Now, Priest has been given a little bit of this elemental synergy going on. It has class elementals, it has a legendary elemental, but not very much of its stuff got retconned into being elementals. And I don't know. I don't think the legendary elemental is quite on the same level as Pyros or Kalamos, and so I think that you do have this attrition stuff that you can benefit from that a lot of other classes can't really benefit from, and that's helping you. And the meta's slower, and there's a lot of other good stuff going on, but it's still, I don't know. I feel like the fact that you can't go roses are red, violets are blue, secret agent coming through, and win games like that with your Draconid Operative. I don't know. I feel like it weakens the class enough that I'm not really, even though the meta's shifted, I'm not going to say that Priest has really moved up very many ranks as a result of this. Anyways, let's get into the cards because the cards are actually kind of decent, and it's a shame. I think in a different world, maybe Priest would end up being better in Arena. I think it's made a lot of improvements, and I don't think this. I just don't think that this latest release and the changes have improved it really that much at all. Binding Heal. Restore 5 health to a minion and your hero. Pretty nice. I mean, it's Flash Heal that helps you as well. Hopefully you were using Flash Heal as a way to heal minions in the first place, but now it tells you, hey, you should use it to heal minions, and we'll give you the heal for free. Kind of awkward with Akanai Soul Priest, which is one of your top cards, because it restores 5 health to you whether you like it or not. So you use it on an enemy minion, kill their minion, and then you take 5. I'd still probably do it, but I don't know. This card is kind of win more in the sense that if you get to the point where Blinding Heal, or not Blinding Heal, Binding Heal is good, right? You've probably already won the game through the use of your hero power. At the same time, this, I don't know. Sometimes you do need that little bit of win more to actually win the game. And this card is not horrible. It's not something I'm going to pick very often, but I'm going to be offered this card a fair number of times because it is a common class spell from the latest set. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I'll be happy ending up with this in my deck, but it's going to be frequent enough that I see this card that I'm going to pick it up just because I kind of have to, because my other options are bad. This is not as bad as Ironhide, though, for Warrior, right? This card is just almost strictly better than Ironhide. I think it's almost even reasonably playable. We'll say like tier 3 for this card. Not super exciting, but okay-ish. Crystalline Oracle, this card is good. Death Rattle, copy a card from your opponent's deck and add it to your hand. Yeah, sure. It's a card from my opponent's deck, so it's probably better than just a random card, right? It's an elemental, which can be pretty important. And that's all there to be said. It's a 1/1 that generates value, cycles, gets something. Sucks if you get like Envenom Weapon off of this guy or something else that's like weapon based. But I think this card is very good. I'm going to draft this most times that I see it. And not much else to be said. The elemental strategy, again, it's relevant. It's relevant for every class. More relevant for mage, shaman, and priest, but not as relevant for priest as it is for shaman and mage, I think. So this tribal text is important, but not as important as it would be in other classes, I think. Curious Glimmerroot. This guy's interesting. 3 mana, 3/3 battle cry. Look at 3 cards. Guess which one started in your opponent's deck. Get a copy of it. Well, it's nice if the cards that you're shown, one of them includes a card that your opponent has played, because then you know the right answer. It's tricky in Arena, though, to get the right answer, because you'll see some kind of weird things. I have to imagine, though, that you're going to more often than not get the answer right, even in Arena, which means that this kind of is a 3 mana 3/3 that at least half the time draws you a card, and probably a decent card too. A card from your opponent's deck is probably better than a random card. I'm saying, I don't know, I need to play with this guy more to see if I can actually like reliably get the card that's from my opponent's deck. But I like this guy. I think 3/3 for 3 that gets value, that potentially just basically does a little bit better than draw you a card, is really good tier 1 style. And I guess it's just a question of how well this Battlecry works out in practice. I've not yet been able to draft this guy or play him, so we'll see how that works. But I'm positive on this guy, at least at the start. Free from Amber. This card is kind of average, a little bit above average, maybe like tier 2-ish, but it's not that exciting, because if you look at the minions that cost 8 or more, I think most often you're just getting an 8/8. This is an 8 mana 8/8. That's what it is. And it's a spell, so you're going to see this card a lot. Your evaluation of it is very relevant, right? You're going to have the choice of choosing this card very frequently. I think a little bit above average is where you want to put this, like a tier 2 style card, right? Where, I don't know, maybe on the upper end of tier 2, but not, I don't think it quite cracks into tier 1. I think if you see 90 cards and you got to pick 30 of them, you might not pick this card if it showed up. I think that's roughly where it is. I think you'll end up with this in your deck a decent number of times, because again, it's a spell, and its offering rate bonus is so huge, and it's not bad, right? Again, it's kind of above average, but I don't know. I see myself passing on this a decent chunk of the time, especially since it's a very slow card, and I might just have better slow things to fill out that top of the curve. But there's just a lot of cards that just don't, like, I'm trying to think of some, like N'Zoth, right? N'Zoth is bad. He's a 5/7 for 8 mana. Medivh isn't very good. Onyxia is like just an 8/8, right? A lot of like really good legendaries. I don't know. Like maybe you get like Deathwing or Yasharj, right? Yasharj is probably the best. I think that's how you pronounce it. Right? You played an 8 mana Yasharj, plain and simple. You play a Deathwing, right? It's just a huge body. But I think you're probably not getting much more than a big dumb guy, and not as big as you might think. Even though it is 8 or more, you can get your 10 cost stuff. The 10 cost stuff often isn't really that much better than the other 8 cost stuff. Expect this to be an 8/8 for 8, is what I want to say, and treat it accordingly. Lyra the Sunshard. I don't think this guy is good enough to make the elemental strategy work. I talked about Mage and Shaman, how they have really good legendary elementals, and that means a lot, because when you play the Discover an Elemental guy, then they almost always, well, not almost always, but a lot of the time they're able to get that legendary elemental as one of their choices. You'll get Lyra the Sunshard as one of your choices a lot of the time when you play that guy. I just don't know if it's good enough. I need to have a spell in hand that I can cast, and then I get a random priest spell to my hand. There's some pretty bad random priest spells, let me say. And some of them just are kind of a non-bow. Like if I play this guy, I cast my spell, right? I have one spell to trigger this guy with, and I get Dragonfire Potion. Now, normally Dragonfire Potion would be fantastic, but I don't want to kill my guy with my own Dragonfire Potion. There's some non-bows there. And 5 mana 3/5 is not a great rate, right? That's a Pit Keeper is really the vanilla standard at 5/6. I'm missing 3 points of stats for this, meaning I kind of really need to cast a spell and draw something. And even then, like, let's say I'm able to cast one spell before this guy dies, right? So imagine this guy read 5 mana 3/5 draw a card, something along those lines, right? Is that really that good? Right? I mean, I don't know. It's good, don't get me wrong. It's like Azure Drake level stats, same mana cost, right? Minus the spell power, but whatever. But like, it's not just like game-winningly good. Whereas a lot of times if I cast Kalamos and I wipe my opponent's board, right, with the Invocation, or I gain 12 or deal 6 to my opponent, or fill my board with 1/1s, it all seems a lot more impactful than this guy. So I don't know. You can go off with this guy and just chain a bunch of stuff together, but I don't think that's how he's usually going to work. And I just don't think there's enough payoff. You don't have enough incidental elementals, and this guy isn't good enough to make the elemental strategy something you want to force. Whereas in like Shaman or Mage, I'm almost always going to draft a lot of elementals and value them very highly because I think my chances of getting there are really good, and I think getting there means a lot more than it does in Priest. So I think your chances of getting there with Priest are a little bit worse, and this guy means the payoff is just not quite as good as it is in those other classes. Mirage Caller. I mean, still, don't get me wrong, still a good card. I'm still going to draft this reasonably highly. I'm going to call this tier 1. There are legendaries that I would take over this. There's, maybe, I don't know, half a dozen or so, but it's still a good card, just not quite enough to hold up an entire drafting strategy, is what I want to say. Mirage Caller, I'm not really sold on this card. You really want to battle cry a minion that has Death Rattle, in which case this card is kind of like Unearthed Raptor. But unlike Unearthed Raptor, you can't just play this on an empty board and get 3-4 worth of stats for 3. Also, you don't want to split up your stats between a 2-3 and a 1-1 because, you're Priest and you want to have a big minion to heal with your hero power. And then, I don't know, like, in most circumstances when you don't have a Death Rattle minion, but you have a minion, so you're kind of in that middle ground, he's just a Razorfen Hunter, which isn't very good. I don't know, there are a few other minions that kind of are relevant. I mean, I guess you could always copy, like, your Charge or something and get, and that's pretty nice. Or you could copy, like, I don't know, one of the poisonous creatures. There are things that you can do besides Death Rattle creatures, but there just aren't a lot of ways to turn on the synergy with this guy. And I think the downside of this guy just being a 3-mana 2-3 do nothing, right, is real enough, and the upside is not huge enough that I'm going to pass on this guy more often than not. Radiant Elemental. It's an elemental, and it's a decent elemental. I've talked before about how I think I like 2-3 bodies more than 3-2 bodies for 2 mana in this format. This guy is an example of a 2-3 body. He's basically the 2-3 version of Sorcerer's Apprentice. I don't know. Part of me wants to say pick this guy because you want to go with elemental strategies. I think this guy is like bottom of tier 1, top of tier 2 type guy. I'm going to pick him as a 2-drop most of the time. He's probably one of your better options as a 2-drop for Priest. Maybe even your best option. I haven't really looked over the entirety of all the Priest options, but right, a 2-3 for 2 with upside. That upside being spells cost 1 less and he's an elemental seems decent. I don't know. Again, I don't think the elemental strategy quite gets there. Right? I don't think it's something you want to force, and so I'm not going to say this guy is like must pick every time. There's a lot of commons I would take over this guy. He's still probably in tier 1 though. When all is said and done, he's just good enough. And I think that, again, I think 2-3 bodies for 2 are better than 3-2 bodies for 2, given all the 2 damage removal in this format. Shadow Visions. What do I think about this card? This card is very dependent upon what your deck is. It's very dependent. If your deck has a lot of, like, especially if your deck has a diversity of really good spells, like you have a Mind Control, you have a Dragonfire Potion, you have a Shadow Madness, you have, I don't even like Shadow or Death, right? If you have like a bunch of options, this card is pretty good because gives you the flexibility of choosing from a bunch of those really good options. You also don't want bad spells in your deck though, and sometimes you're kind of forced to have that. Like, I don't know how I feel about casting this and then casting, I don't know, like Freed from Amber, which isn't even really that bad of a spell, but it's one of the ones I'm going to have more commonly. Then I'm paying 10 mana for something that costs between 8 and 10 mana and doesn't have a battle cry. I don't know, boys. I mean, I think this card just isn't very good. It's average, it's filler, it's like tier 3. It's not really something you want in your deck, but you're going to end up with it in your deck a decent chunk of the time just because that's the way things work. It's a spell, which means the offering rate is higher. It is an epic, though, so you're not going to see it that often. I just don't think this card is that insane. I think in some decks it'll rise up to like tier 2 status, and other decks it'll just be really, really bad. The fact that you spend 2 mana for it, you don't get any discount on the spell that you discover. Discovering a copy of a spell in my deck is really good card selection, but I'm paying 2 mana for it, which seems like about what I would expect to pay for an effect like that. Yeah, I think I'll pass on this actually a decent chunk of the time, but I'll also end up picking it up a decent chunk of the time, so tier 3-ish. Tortollan Shellraiser. I think that's how you pronounce it. Tortollan. Tortosolon. I don't know how you'd combine tortoise with Allion. Tortoyan. Could be Tortoyan, right? With the Spanish double L. Totoyan Shellraiser. Anyways, card's okay. It's a 4 mana 2/6 taunt. We have a vanilla dinosaur like that. This has the Death Rattle, give a random friendly minion +1/+1. Because this has taunt, you're probably going to get off that Death Rattle more often than most. And I guess it's a question of, just how much do you value a 4 mana 2/6 taunt that has some upside. I think the answer is that this card is fairly average, and I'm gonna call it like another tier 3 guy. Like, this card is kind of fillerish. Don't really want a bunch of these guys, but he's all right. I mean, I'm fine with him in my deck, I guess. Like, I guess part of the issue, part of the downside, is that I'm not even really guaranteed to get off this Death Rattle. So I'm going to say that this guy is maybe like high up on tier 3, but not. I don't think he's breaking into like tier 2, just because sometimes I don't have another minion, or they have a way of killing my other minion, right? Like, maybe there's AoE. They flame strike and then they trade off into this guy after all my other stuff has died. I can imagine this guy not getting off the Death Rattle a decent chunk of the time, and so I'm not super excited about him for that reason. And there you have it. There's Priest. Slower meta, and Priest does partake a little bit of the synergies that go with elementals, but I don't think it's really enough to make this work. I don't think this, like, how many cards are here that just don't really excite me that much? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's like a bunch of average stuff, right? So I don't know. Priest is not. Priest is okay. Priest is okay. Priest is like, it's lost some ground because it's losing the dragons. It's making it back with some average cards. I think it's just kind of a treadmill for it. I'm not exactly sure where I shake out on Priest at the end of the day, because I really do have to see how much it gets hurt by losing what used to be a lot of the core attraction of Priest, at least with the way the offering rates were in the past. But a lot of kind of middle of the road, tier 2-ish cards that have been broken out here. And so it's not like it's horrible or anything, but nothing that's really drawing me into it in a big way, because I don't, as much as I like the elementals, I just don't think this is enough of an elemental payoff. Because some drafts you're just not going to find that guy, the elemental that discovers more elementals, and you don't really have enough stuff going on here to really justify what you're doing with elementals, right? So, yeah, I think that's roughly where you're at with Priest. All right, on to the next class.